very important topic. So with that, Mr. Manager, the floor is yours.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Last year during the budget preparation and also preparation of the capital improvement program, Council asked us to drill down deeper on a long-range plan for our convention facilities and the complex that currently houses the Round Building C2 as well as Bob Brown. And the emphasis was try to find a way to move forward with a 21st century solution to community use of facilities as well as convention use of facilities. Late 2022, city staff got together with Visit Wichita to talk about an approach forward. And as a result of that, we've engaged with CSL to revisit its convention center marketing analysis, and also with Populous to help develop a concept plan for going forward and addressing the convention and community facility needs for the community. Both of these firms have been involved in previous work around this topic, and they have significant knowledge and data related to our convention needs and our existing facilities. So with that, we're really excited to share their findings and recommendations for a possible concept plan with you today. We should note that today's presentation is oriented towards convention center and community facilities. We recognize more work is needed to address the issue of performing arts space, space that we know we need to accommodate modern needs for performances. That will come at a later date. So today's convention and community facilities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam Paulich with Populous to start the process, or the discussion, sorry. Adam?
Mr. Manager, thank you so much. Mr. Mayor, thank you. Council, it's a pleasure to be here. It's exciting. I mean, I'm going to try to tone down my enthusiasm just a little bit, but this is an exciting process. Just to put it in perspective, I'm Adam Paulich, I'm a principal, and I'm a design director for our global convention center practice at Populous. So I get the pleasure of seeing projects all over the world. I was hired at Populous about 12 years ago, and my first business trip was to Wichita for an iteration of this that was a long time ago, meeting with Susie and her team and John D'Angelo back then. And so it's very serendipitous to be here today to talk about this exciting opportunity. And so Populous, of course, has been such a friend to Wichita over the years. The arena, lots of community engagement. It's just a really exciting opportunity for us to still be involved with the city. So today, knowing that this is like a workshop format, I just want to reiterate where we're at in this process that we went through. And there's 6 topics we're going to talk about today. The first thing that we really want to address is just what the project goals and the design drivers are for a project of this type. These are once-in-a-generation ideas, and so we just want to make sure that what we're discussing today is aligned with the voices of the community. And we've had the pleasure of working with multiple community organizations over the years for extensive public feedback for this process. And so everything that we've had the pleasure of being a part of is reflected in this document. This is not just a few-month effort. This is years and years of relationship building with the community. So again, what we've heard and what does that mean for the future? I also want to talk about what's happening in the industry. So I have 5 case studies in here that I think are really important that really highlight the changes that's happening in hospitality globally. And I think Wichita particularly is at a very unique position to do something really great here when you look at what's happening on a global stage. And then obviously we really want to address just the future of Bob Brown, Century 2. I know that there's been multiple discussions over the years, keep the building, tear the building down, repurpose the building. And I'm really confident today that I think we have a great solution to make this viable. We have a program, and my colleague Bill Kruger from CSNL, he's going to talk about that with you. I've had the pleasure of working with Bill, again, all over the country, and they just do excellent work. And he has some data that I think really supports this vision. And then process and next steps, a loose cost estimate, just so we know kind of what we're dealing with here, the realm of possibility. And then obviously I'll turn it back over to the mayor for any kind of question and answer. Yeah, or sorry, to Mr. Manager for question and answer. So project goals. So for today, what we're really trying to do, this is more informational, and I want to just caveat this with, this is not a final architectural design. This is literally just showing what's possible on the site. So there's going to be a lot of pretty imagery, and we do that to communicate a feeling and emotion of what's possible for the future of Wichita. So we want to confirm the program and planning opportunities around the site. And so when we say the site, that is south of Douglas, that is north of Waterman, and west of Main Street to the river. That encompasses the library. It encompasses the existing Hyatt Hotel, parking garages, Century 2, and the Bob Brown. And of course, there's a beautiful riverfront there that we didn't want to forget about as well. So how can we start to incorporate these things into the riverfront? Obviously, doing a project of this big, we really want to focus on mobility, parking, vehicular, pedestrian access, all of those things that really put your community back together. Like I mentioned earlier, industry case studies, and then just an overall architectural vision. So that's why we're here today. And from my own personal experience, this is certainly the most fun part of an architectural process, to be able to show big ideas like this. So this is what we have today. And I'm not going to lie, the Century 2 commands a lot of attention. The blue roof is iconic. It's part of all of your imagery when you just Google Wichita on the internet. And so we have heard loud and clear that this civic icon deserves to stay. And it deserves to be a beautiful piece of architecture that can live on for the next generation. And so when you think about Century 2, what does that mean for Bob Brown? I think there was always this relationship that said if you want to expand Bob Brown, Century 2 has to go. What we're saying today is we think there's a real nice symbiotic relationship between the two to make something really exciting possible. Just by happenstance, the public library, we were walking the site last December, did not know that the public library was vacant. I had not been here in a few years. And we all immediately said, holy cow, this building is, it's very unique. It has great presence. It has great bones. It's an asset on site that should not be torn down. It's something that we should actually use to our advantage and give it back to the community. So there's a little bit of attention there on the library as well. Again, the river, amazing. The ballpark across the street, amazing. Getting people across the river, a little challenging right now. So really understanding what it means to take pedestrians across the river to the potential development on the West Bank. And then, convention centers are interesting. Personally, I never thought in a million years that I would be the design director of a convention center practice. It's not something you really dream to be, but what I realize is that convention centers really are these really important part of civic infrastructure. And we have this kind of saying that we've coined, especially since the pandemic, is bring the civic back to civic center. How can you make these buildings, these public icons, and give something that the people of Wichita can be proud of to welcome them back into the city? And I think in the case studies, as we walk through this, you'll see that convention centers today are more than just big boxes. They have to be. They have to be. We're not just talking about a big box here. We're talking about multiple opportunities to do something really special and unique for Wichita. And I'll let Bill hit on this. I don't want to talk too much about some of his content, but we're seeing it over and over again in all of the cities that we work for, all in North America, Canada, Mexico. The transformative effects of projects of this type, whether it's a convention center, a performing arts center, a downtown ballpark, an arena, they're iconic. You might not see it at first, but years down the road, this is what really changes communities. Giving your residents different options, a quality of life component to this is really important. Like I said, in all of our research at Populous about what the future of convention centers are, it's community integration, 100% community integration. When people come to Wichita, they want to be a part of the community. They don't want to be on an island away from what a true Wichita experience is. So that ties into new visitation and then naturally adjacent development as well. We would hope that this really facilitates some new thinking around the site. And then you'll see in some of our case studies, convention centers have had this bad reputation over the years of being these white elephants in their communities. Couple that with highways that cut through communities, have kind of parceled up downtowns. So what we are seeing at Populous is that there is an active effort to put these communities back together, to put these connections back across the districts and make them safe and inviting for not only visitors but community members alike. So I think you'll see a lot of that in our vision today. So it's no secret this project has been studied. This project has been studied often. I think the cadence was every year or so, since 2005 or 2007. And today, really this is the outcome of all of that. But, you know, from 2019 through today, there has been an enormous amount of work done for this site. And I just want to be very open and say that all of that work that has been done to date has not gone to waste. It has absolutely influenced where we are today. Mr. Manager did a great job of introducing that, saying that we basically got to start this process with a head start, and it was great, and that's how we got to where we are today. So, and just visually, I think you'll see that you know, if you go all the way back to 1882 to potentially 2030 when we're reconnecting the city, I think you start to see how the evolution of the site has changed over the years. It went from basically undeveloped riverfront to a very dense neighborhood, to the introduction of the round building in Century 2. And professionally and personally, the site is ripe for that next generation of vision right now. So with that being said, I am going to kick it over to Bill Kruger from CSNL. Bill, come on up here. And, you know, like I said, Bill and I, we have a good cadence working with each other and totally respect all of his data, and excited to hear what he has to say.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Mr. Mayor, council members, Mr. Manager, great to be here. Bill Kruger with CSL International. I'm a senior vice president with the company. Been with the company for 27 years now and been involved in Wichita and many other markets throughout the country. We do feasibility work, so market, financial, economic studies of projects of all different types relating to the event and hospitality industry, so convention centers, arenas, stadiums, projects like that. So our involvement in Wichita, I believe about 10 years ago, was our first study of the convention needs in Wichita. And so with each step along the way, let me just get to the next slide here, most of the traditional feasibility study will look like those numbers on the right-hand side of this, where you'll start by looking at the existing business that takes place within the building or the marketplace. You'll look at some of the infrastructure in the community to see how that ties in to supporting a convention product. We'll look at trends throughout the industry. We'll look at other comparable projects. What other communities are investing in these projects, and what types of solutions are they coming up with to meet the industry needs? But the most important thing is really number 5, which is really having that direct conversations with event planners, meeting planners, the people that would be choosing your destination, your community over others to host their conventions, their trade shows, their meetings, conferences, et cetera. So having that direct dialogue with meeting planners is really critical. And, you know, over the years in Wichita, we've done a number of completed interviews with convention planners to get their feedback about what they think about the existing product, what they like about the destination, and should we invest in a product that would fully meet the needs of their event or their events, including the hotel package. How likely would they be to bring one or more events to Wichita? So we're always focusing throughout any of our analyses in any market about the incremental. What could be had if we invested in something, an expansion, a new product, in order to capture business that we're not currently getting? Because the last thing we want to do is cannibalize existing buildings or structures or businesses within the community. We really want to grow the pot. We want to bring in more economic impact, more hotel room nights, more visitors that will drop money in the community and then leave, and that's really the best form of economic impact. And frankly, that's the reason why, you know, so many of your peer markets, which you'll see here shortly, I'll make a comment on that when we get to the comparable markets slide, why they've invested so many millions of dollars over the last few decades in terms of improving their convention product, their convention presence within the industry to tap into this economic impact. So when we were re-engaged last year, or a little more than a year ago, one thing that obviously was very top of mind is how is the industry changing or evolving with respect to the pandemic? Coming out of the pandemic, you know, are there fundamental changes that we need to look at? This data on the right side of this slide here relates to a survey that we did right in the middle of the pandemic when we were talking to meeting planners, talking about their expectations of when the industry will recover to pre-pandemic trends. And as you could see, that the expectation, you know, even in the middle of the pandemic, it was most of the people felt by 2025, the industry would fully recover and resume its trajectory in terms of its supply and demand metrics. What we have been seeing is we did see that early disruption where there was a lot of cancellations of event activity, of course. Almost everything was canceled in early 2020 through early 2021, but we've seen a robust recovery. And so when I travel around the country and speak to other markets and their convention and visitor bureaus and some of the other industry participants, much of the activity is fully recovered at this point in time. There are some markets that are still getting back up to speed, but the recovery is, at least where we stand today, is happening a little bit quicker than we might have anticipated just last year. So that's important, but we have been seeing some pretty important changes in terms of what the convention marketplace is looking for in terms of product and amenities and capabilities and the types of destinations they're looking for. And when we get to some of the other slides here that I'm going to be talking about, you'll notice that some of those really tie in well to Wichita's destination. Its brand, its affordability, its accessibility, and some of those other types of key characteristics. So what we're seeing in terms of emerging and accelerated industry trends by speaking to these meeting planners, these convention planners around the country, there's always going to be that need to meet face-to-face. That's never changed. I've been, doing this for close to 30 years now, having these dialogues with industry participants and meeting planners over the years. And, 20, 30 years ago, there's discussion about technology ultimately replacing the need to meet face-to-face. And instead, what we've been seeing is a lot of these technologies that are coming up and emerging are doing more in terms of complementing the actual in-person event as opposed to replacing them. So when we look at products moving forward coming out of this pandemic disruption, we notice that there's more emphasis put on virtual and real-life hybrid events. So you've got the combination of having the in-person event, the importance of meeting face-to-face, and having convention and networking activities and educational activities face-to-face, but also having technology to be a complement to that in terms of these hybrid meetings where you can be beaming in content, beaming in other participants virtually while you're doing in-person events. Outdoor spaces are much more prevalent, and there's more emphasis on that, making a walkable, pedestrian-friendly, visitor-friendly environment around the convention center. 30 years ago, it was all about, let's just put up the box and let's put it somewhere next to another hotel, and then we're going to be good. But now it's all about the experience in and out of the building, after the activities, before the activities, much more experiential. So having more flexible spaces and interactive learning spaces and networking spaces within your buildings. So when you look at all these pictures and you contrast that with what C2 and Bob Brown is today, you'll notice that there's some distinct differences in terms of the nature of a lot of these spaces that you're coming to marketplace with right now in terms of the C2 and the Bob Brown product. And that's really emphasized and underscored by these conversations that we're having with meeting planners in terms of their expectations of the types of products. And just looking at this list of comparable markets that are similar in size, population, location in terms of Wichita, you look at these 16 markets, and the noteworthy thing about all these is every one of these, except for 3, have recently expanded, built new, or reinvested in their convention product in the last 25 years. So that's just highlighting the fact that these are the competitive markets that you are competing for these rotating national pieces of business, these conventions and trade shows that can bring in a massive amount of tourism and economic impact and hotel room nights and supporting lots of things within communities. And almost every one of them have addressed convention investment projects in the recent past. And so that, again, highlights the fact when you look at, when C2 was originally built and then when Bob Brown was added, just in terms of age, the difference and the differential continues to grow with what Wichita is coming to the marketplace with. So when you look at C2 and Bob Brown in terms of its product, one of the most noteworthy things is when we're having conversations with meeting planners and convention planners is the fact that the space in C2 and Bob Brown, in terms of what the expectations are, particularly with the national marketplace, is that it's substandard and a little bit out of step in terms of what the orientation, the nature of that space, the quality of that space, the amenities, the pre-function spaces, et cetera. So when you look at the Round building in C2, and then you look at the Bob Brown and some of their space, compare that to what Oklahoma City came up with, and this is just their exhibit hall in Oklahoma City with their new project. But you notice the large amount of pre-function space in the front, and you've got independent access for the public in the front of the building into the subdivided halls that are all equally sized, equally spaced, high ceiling, column free. And then you go to the back, and that's independently accessed for the loading in the back of house. You know, so that's kind of a prototypical, traditional, modern program or alignment of space in Oklahoma City. And then when you need to go to the national marketplace and you're trying to compete for business, you're competing on an uneven playing field at that point in terms of your products. And that's one of the most noteworthy things that we heard over and over again is the fact that you really need, you know, modern convention space if you really want to compete for our business. So importantly, with these meeting planner interviews that I keep alluding to, you know, with this latest effort, we completed 130 interviews representing 150 events. Some of them have been to Wichita in the past. Many of them would be new pieces of business. And comparing that to our original study back in 2013, when we interviewed that, what we found is that for most of the state business, meaning if you're a state convention or a state association that has an annual convention that can rotate anywhere within the state, the reality is you're already getting most of that business. You're already being able to compete for it because there's less options within the state. And people want to come to Wichita to serve their membership base, et cetera. But when you have national marketplace, that's really the core area that we're thinking about or targeting for penetration, and how well can we improve within the national marketplace of conventions that can go anywhere in the country, right? So when we talked to them back in 2013, there's a 38% positive interest. If we had the product that fully met the requirements of their group or their event, how likely would they be to bring one or more future events to Wichita? And so 38% of them responded in a favorable, positive manner, definitely, likely, or possibly. And then when we did that same type of survey, that same type of question recently here with this latest effort, we noticed that the demand even increased from that point, which is a very good news in the sense that you've still got a growing reputation within the national marketplace in terms of the destination, and now it just is highlighting more the misalignment with what the product that you're coming to market with is relative to what they're seeing in other markets around the country. So the important thing is that demand is growing in the national marketplace, and that's really the core area of target that we'd be looking at. We're hearing more and more of these groups, especially coming out of the pandemic, saying we're looking for convenient, affordable, easily accessible communities to bring our events to. We like what's happening in downtown Wichita. We like what we're seeing with the ballpark and the arts and the arena and things like that. And so the presence and the visibility within the industry is continuing to grow, but the product is really not keeping pace in terms of what type of product that you have to offer the marketplace. So after all the market analysis and the research that we did, the type of market supportable program that we feel best matches what the demand is from particularly the national marketplace would be 130,000 square feet of contiguous prime space. Now, Bob Brown has a fair amount of exhibit space, but not all of that is prime. You've got a lower ceiling height on a portion of that space. So the prime space, meaning minimum of 30-foot tall ceilings of traditional concrete floor space, and Bob Brown is a little bit more than 60,000 square feet. So that's off by a pretty significant margin. And then the C2 space really doesn't serve the needs of the convention industry. You know, it's doing lots of different things, and it's conceptualized to be both a local and a non-local, dealing with the arts and with conventions and a whole host of different types of events in that type of space. But that's really not in alignment with what the national industry is looking for. They're really looking for a product that would have 130,000 square feet of contiguous, meaning altogether, constant prime exhibit space, and then a ballroom of 30,000 square feet. Right now, your ballroom is significantly smaller than that. You've got the Hyatt, where you're sharing some meeting space with that particular headquarter hotel product. It's a great headquarter hotel, but we also noticed that in order to meet what the market is really looking for, that another 100 rooms of full-service hotel rooms would really be the appropriate level to both match the amount of space, what the demand levels are, and then the number of hotel rooms. And so 130,000 of contiguous prime space exhibit space, 30,000 square feet of ballroom space, and then 40,000 square feet of total meeting space. So when the Hyatt was originally developed, it was publicly owned in the early days. Now it's been transacted to the private sector. So now we've got a private sector full-service hotel. When you look at the space that is controlled completely in-house by the Hyatt, it's got a smaller amount of in-house meeting space than a normal full-service hotel would have of that size. And so the long-term goal from at least the market consultant's perspective would be to have two products that more or less can stand on their own. You'd have a full-service hotel that would have the right amount of in-house meeting space, ballroom and breakout meeting space in proportion to the number of hotel rooms it's got. And then you've got a convention space that has those three critical areas of space, the concrete floor exhibit space, the ballroom space, and the meeting space, all under one roof, attached or directly adjacent to the full-service hotel, headquarter hotel product. And so that's ultimately what our market supportable recommendation would be with the program side of that. And when you start thinking about what that means, again, focusing on the incremental, what would that mean in terms of when we model out the trajectory right now with C2 Bob Brown into the future, and then a new convention center, once it's opened and it stabilizes after a few years, if you compare those two event loads in terms of projections, we'd have a significant increase in the number of national conventions, which is really the economic impact bread and butter. It's really the reason why communities invest in these projects throughout the entire country, and your entire competitive set has done in the recent decades too. So you're getting a lot more conventions. You're more capable in the local meetings with meetings and banquets and other types of civic events too. And then when you translate that into attendee days and hotel room nights, a significant uptick in the number of non-local attendance and also the hotel room nights that a project like this could support. So the spending associated with all these incremental attendees really forms the basis of the net new economic impact that a project like this can deliver to a community. So summarizing the economic impact, we've got a very detailed model that we continue to update as we're engaged more to continue to analysis in Wichita. But when you look at incrementally, the direct spending number, when you see that kind of at that second layer down there, the direct spending would be the non-local people that are brought to Wichita to attend a convention, and then they're spending money in the community, both in the building, but in hotels and restaurants and entertainment, transportation, retail, et cetera. That net new dollars compared to what you're doing today in terms of projections forms that incremental net new economic impact that this project could deliver to the community. So these numbers are substantial. I mean, they're very high in the fact of what an investment in the market supportable product that I outlined previously could deliver every year. So this is an annual number. This does not include the construction economic impact during the construction period while it's being built, but this is the operational impact. Every year, both spending that occurs within the facility that didn't otherwise exist in Wichita and spending that exists outside of the building when different visitor amenities, hospitality amenities throughout the community that wouldn't have otherwise existed if it weren't for this investment in the convention product. So that's more than 59 million, close to $60 million per year in direct, indirect, and induced spending that could be delivered under a new convention center. 45 million of that would be incremental that you're not getting today. And that has ripple effects in terms of the number of full and part-time jobs supported throughout the entire economy, that enhanced layer of visitation and spending. And then also personal income, and then new sales, new tax dollars that could be delivered. So $1.2 million in incremental net new city and county taxes and fees that could be delivered as a part of this year in and year out. So just lastly, my last slide before I'm going to turn it back over to Adam would be, the quantitative economic impacts, the benefits for doing this is only one piece of the puzzle. It's the intangible, the non-quantifiable quality of life aspects that often are almost as important as the quantitative economic impacts that you could deliver by a project like this. But the transformative effects, and you'll see some of the pictures that Adam's going to be showing in terms of some of the conceptual renderings, could totally transform, your downtown, your riverfront, as a part of this being an important anchor piece of the transformation and the future of downtown Wichita. There's quality of life. You'll see with a bigger building, a more capable building, a more modern building, that you can also support a dramatic level of new local and civic and other types of uses too, beyond just the national conventions that we were focusing on. But there's, many types of benefits that are very important that you really can't put a number on, but they're really critical nonetheless. And, in my travels around the country, many of these convention centers really form a really core and critical and imperative anchor component of a mixed use or a larger master plan of a downtown or a riverfront that really is proven to be transformative, in many of these markets where they've done that, where it's completely elevated communities, at least in the convention industry and the visitor industry, to a whole different level if it wasn't for that original investment in a project like this. So, bottom line is, in summary, we're bullish on what we're hearing from the marketplace in terms of a new and enhanced convention product in Wichita. We think the destination continues to gain steam in terms of visibility and attractiveness within the greater national industry, and it's really just lacking that type of modern convention product that these groups are really looking for in order to get their business. I'm going to turn it over to Adam, and he's going to go through some additional slides.
Excellent, Bill. Thank you so much. Yeah, just to reiterate what Bill said, nowhere in the marketplace are we seeing people build square footage just for the sake of building square footage for these buildings. The arms race is over. I promise you, Orange County, New York, Las Vegas, they've already won. All of these projects that we're seeing, and we'll talk about Oklahoma City in a little bit, it's really building the right size program to support your community. And then I think you'll see that coming out of the pandemic specifically, people are really looking for a different type of experience for these types of spaces and these types of environments. And so we're just going to start, and I'm going to let these two slides sit here because this is really going to kind of curate the rest of the discussion today. So this is your existing program today. As I said, I laid out the boundaries earlier, Douglas, Main, Waterman Street. So you obviously have your existing Century 2. What's old is new again. And I think that there's a great opportunity there to turn that into something wonderful. As Bill mentioned, and we have the Hyatt Tower 2. I would say a lot of communities at this stage don't have a headquarters hotel. So we're already at a positive here. Parking as well, adjacent to the building. You have your existing Bob Brown. And then, of course, the library event space like we spoke about earlier. I just want to show you this image because I think it's no surprise that when you walk out there, it's a sea of concrete and ramps and stairs. Fort Knox maybe is some of the comparables that we've had. It's pretty unapproachable from all sides. I think the riverfront is great. That's a really positive as far as the development right now, and our goal is to take that positive and kind of transform that to all four sides of this district. And so this is the plan that we came up with. This is our site and program strategy, and we will dive in to each one of these numbers and how it relates to the diagram. And we broke these down into 4 categories. The first one is we want to call reimagine. And let's reimagine Century 2 as it is in place and what that can do for the community. And when you look at that, Century 2 is more than just the round building. It's the identity that it has. It's its relationship to the outdoor space, to the library. So first things first is that 30,000 square foot ballroom that Bob mentioned. I promise you that meeting planners nationally and globally are looking for unique experiences. There would be nothing more unique than to put that 30,000 square foot ballroom inside of Century 2. Studying this over the years, we know that there's some structural challenges, but we also know that building was built like Fort Knox. Under our first analysis here at this process, putting that ballroom inside of Century 2 is absolutely viable. What that does, though, is it opens up the other space of the Century 2. There's about 100,000 square foot left in there. Knowing that we have a performing arts piece that we are sensitive to and not trying to displace them by any means, but repurposing that existing square footage inside Century 2. We've talked about esports, we've talked about community space, we've talked about adult learning. We're not recommending a program yet, that is that next phase of study, but we do know that there's an opportunity there to turn that into something to support Bob Brown and this ballroom adjacent to the development. The library, of course, I already said, what a hidden gem. It's right in our front yard. Talk about something that could be this new dynamic gateway into this district. Just excellent. What an exciting type of architecture that I think has a lot of staying power. So our goal would be to capitalize on that and make that transformative, make it work for us. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the plazas out there a little bit disorganized. So let's put some clarity out there. Let's make those plazas inviting for the community. Let's make them usable. Let's make them flexible. So again, that's just around the Century 2 area. So when we go to the Bob Brown, I think every time that Bob Brown has been looked at before, everyone thought that we could only go towards Main Street. Once we started to do some sketching in our small little group that we've been doing over the past few months, we started to realize that there's some real deficiencies in the loading of Century 2 and the loading of Bob Brown that need to be updated regardless. So this is the time to start doing that. So on top of expanding Bob Brown a little bit to the east, we're going to expand a little bit to the west. And what that does is we get to improve that entire spline of the Bob Brown to turn it into that Oklahoma City model of that industry standard functionality first space. Again, that Bob Brown outdoor events place, you'll see in one of my case studies in Calgary, people want to be outside. The days of putting people in meeting rooms with no access to natural light, especially in a climate like Wichita, a little cold during the winter months, but most of the year, people want to be outside. So let that transition happen of getting guests inside and outside the building. Just in Calgary, for example, when we met with meeting planners, they said, we want nothing more than guests to be inside of our building to see a community event going on outside. That's what really attracted to a destination. I mentioned the dedicated backup house, service and loading. A facility cannot work if the spline is not functional. And then the Hyatt, we were just calling it the Tower 2. The ability to support 100 rooms adjacent to the Hyatt to support this overall development, as Bill mentioned. So then we get to all the fun stuff. This is the nuts and bolts to make sure we can do all that. And we heard loud and clear that this connection to the river is absolutely important. So instead of building this wall, which I think, again, convention centers have had this reputation of being a wall to the community, let's break down that barrier and turn it into something exciting that people actually want to participate with. So we're calling it this up and over connection. You can see this green spine, and we'll get into more detail as we get into some of the other drawings. But really emphasizing that connection between the Bob Brown and the existing Century 2. A new pedestrian bridge that would then connect you to the mixed-use development on the west side of the river, and of course the ballpark over there. While we're doing all of this, we just want to overall clean up all of the pedestrian, vehicular, and drop-off accommodations on the entire site. So there's some reorganization here. And number 14, for example, we call that a sustainable flex lot. I don't have a look into the future, but I know that our relationship with cars is going to change. So putting just parking out there I don't think is the right move. We definitely want to design it so that it could be this outdoor plaza, or it could be parking in situations where you do need those types of events. So really just thinking about that future customer in mind and how they're going to arrive to the building. And that's local and national. Then, of course, future development. I think when we get to some of these other slides, you'll see that there's some areas that might make sense for some potential mixed-use development that could help anchor the site. But of course, the hotel is right for that as well at the Hyatt. And then this parking approach, as I just discussed, and we'll have a slide to address that later. So I know that this is a lot, but again, this is a big vision. And so each one of these components was taken with great care. And as I mentioned earlier, the community feedback that we have received over the years has been so positive towards keeping this in place and creating a central destination for the heart of Wichita. And I think that each one of these 16 buckets really ties into all of that data that we've collected over the years. So, just to prove that this is happening and that the market is different, I have 5 case studies that I wanted to show you all today. The first is what we call the Convention Center of the Future. And Populus's tagline is drawing people together. When the pandemic happened, what a weird position that put us in. Because all of our projects, stadiums, arenas, convention centers, major league ballparks, went dark. So we took that very serious, and our phone was ringing off the hook, particularly me and my colleague Michael Lockwood, our managing director, and we didn't know what was going to happen. So we took that very seriously, and we ended up going to the market for a full year research project. Not so much data from what Bill has presented, but an emotional standpoint of are people still going to want to gather. And we ended up writing a book called Rethinking the Way We Gather. And this book has traveled the world. It's influencing projects of this scale all over the globe. It's a very exciting time. And like I said, sometimes moving this industry is like moving an oil tanker. So these progressive amount of changes in destinations like Wichita really help to push this needle forward for the future guest. Then I really want to talk about Oklahoma City. I had the pleasure of being the lead designer for that project, so I've seen that city grow. Wichita right now is where Oklahoma City was 8 years ago. And you'll see how that city is starting to rally around these types of developments. On a global scale, I want to talk about ICC Sydney, another kind of controversial process where the city was so paranoid that we were just going to drop a giant, ominous box in the middle of the busiest place in all of Australia, and you'll see how we address that. And lastly, the BMO Center in Calgary. Again, the BMO Center in Calgary, it's the site of Calgary Stampede, which is the largest outdoor show on earth. For those of you that are familiar, it's about 3 million guests that visit Calgary in July each year. This will be the first building opened post-pandemic next year. So I think what we're going to show you here is that the types of spaces are vastly different than your traditional ballroom, meeting room, and exhibition hall. And then, for those that are aware, Climate Pledge Arena is a new arena that opened up in Seattle this past year for the Seattle Kraken. That was a Populous project. We call this modern heritage because it's scary how much similarities there are to Climate Pledge to Century 2. So essentially a historic building that we kept in place with an iconic roof, and we turned it into an NHL arena underneath it. So these are just trends that we're seeing, real life proof that what we're talking about here in Wichita is doable with the program and the task at hand. So Convention Center of the Future, purposely thinking way out there, right? Because we like to call this the universe of ideas. If you go this far, that's not what we're aiming. You want to put big deals out there so that these big ideas land somewhere in the realm of possibility. And this is why Populous is who we are, is we have the ability to think this big. And so doing this research really allows us to come to cities like Wichita and say confidently that there's an opportunity here to achieve these types of developments. And it's interesting, when we went out to the global marketplace, similar to what Bill was saying, instead of asking people what kept them up at night, we asked them what they were proud of. There are facilities in the world that are doing an excellent job of all of this. And you start to see things like sustainability, connection to outdoors, community engagement, service reputation. Those were not things that people were talking about 10 years ago. It's changing. And to get people off of Zoom and into your building, it's these types of spaces that are going to be required to do that. And so during this process, we came up with 128 unique ideas, program ideas, outside of your traditional convention center program. We turned them into a card game. I know Mr. Manager has a copy of the card game. But it's amazing what this has done for us in the market is it's allowed us to break down that barrier of design. Sometimes people don't even know where to start. And when we show up with 128 ideas that says, let's just talk about 1 or 2 of these, it really opens up the conversation. And we broke them down in technology, experience, sustainability, wellness, community. All of that is outside of your traditional convention center space. And we even broke them down into qualifiers: cost, time to implement, and impact. Some of the ideas are so small as touchless faucets in your restrooms. Some of the ideas are as big as convention center at the spaceport in the middle of the Mojave Desert. So you can tell how we have scaled our thinking here, but we're confident that there's implemental strategies in all of this thinking. Again, just the cards laid out for all of us, and a shot of the cards actually in action at our office in Populous. And so I know that Bill showed that floor plan of Oklahoma City, and I think the point of this diagram here is that if you just squint, you can see that what people are asking for in the industry is vastly different than what's out there today. And this kind of information is starting to show up in this next generation of facilities. Quite futuristic, but I'm excited to show you renderings of projects that will be opening within a year that aren't quite holograms out of the floor, but they're definitely this next level of hospitality that is the expectation in the future of meetings. So next I want to talk about Oklahoma City. First of all, I've used to make that drive a million times, and so it's great to just stop in Wichita now and not have to continue the other 3 hours. And so, this photo right here, when we came to town, the park wasn't designed. They didn't have a hotelier on board. They didn't know what the future of the Thunder was going to be. They were still debating the streetcar. And I think today, for those of you that have visited, you realize that they've successfully transformed a large amount of their downtown. It's not there yet by any means, but the groundwork is there. And I give kudos to the city and the MAPS program, of course. It's very unique, but they run an excellent process down there. So just to document this, we've actually went and had drone aerial footage shot of all of our projects over the past 10 years to see how the city is growing around it. And so you see that line for Oklahoma City Boulevard. Everything to the south of that has been built within the last 24 months. It's pretty crazy. And building this relationship with the city and now understanding how people are using their city because of these developments, it's an amazing transformation. One of our urban planners, when they came up with this Court Shore site, I believe he is on record saying it was probably would have been cheaper to move the river than to build more of downtown. And when we were designing this and looking at the convention center, that east side or west side of Scissortail Park, in this image, there's no development there. But when you go there today, it's restaurants, condos, apartments. And when you're just in Oklahoma City, the park is active. It's active. It's doing its job. And you know what? When you are there as a convention guest, there's nothing that you'd want to do more than go experience what's happening in the park. So let's talk about ICC Sydney for a second. Global scale, of course. This is in Darling Harbour. Darling Harbour is the busiest public space in all of Australia. And this was a P3 competition. And I highlight that because of a headquarters hotel and a development adjacent to it. And the government of South Wales was so concerned that we were not going to be respectful to the surrounding community and the neighborhoods, that they were just going to get this box that landed right in the middle of one of the most beautiful spaces in Australia. And so what did we do? We strategically broke the building into 3 parts to give it the attention that it needed, but also to respect the surroundings of the neighborhoods. Wild idea at the time. I promise you we had some folks on the client side that could not wrap their head around functioning in a convention center that wasn't connected. However, the feedback from the market is that this is the next generation of facility. And so you see that there's there's a highway that comes over it, pedestrian paths that go through and over the building, walkability around all 4 sides. And again, taking some of that program and putting it to the front of the building, it really changes the look of your facility. On opening day, this is Tumbalong Park, people thought that this was a condominium complex. If your convention center is getting mistaken for a condominium complex, I think it's a good problem to have, because these are meeting rooms that typically would be buried in the back corridors of a building that we brought right out to the front for these panoramic views. So again, really changing the perception here. So lastly, from a case study of a convention center, I want to talk about Calgary. And so we started this in 2019, so the pandemic hit about 50% the way through design. And it really allowed us to go in and think about what the future of this building looked like from an experience perspective. And I highlight these red dots because all of those red dots were things that were not in the original building program. Those were all things that we developed with the city of Calgary to make this an attractive destination, not just for people that are visiting the convention center, but also for people within the community. What you're not seeing here is the Saddle Dome is adjacent to this property. And this is basically, when it's developed, going to be their pre- and post-game parking lot whenever the NHL team is successful. So it's not just about the convention center, it's about connecting the dots with all of these other wonderful assets that you have in the community. And one of the views that I'm going to show, you're just within eyeshot of the arena. There's great synergy to happen there before and after events. And then when you add the ballpark to that, the convention center and Century 2 is right in the center of that connection. So there's great synergy there already. And this is what we call the exchange. This is a space that was not in the program. It's about 20,000 square feet, and you can see it has a stage, it has a fireplace, the largest fireplace in Alberta, believe it or not, and a bar that could be coffee in the mornings, food service in the afternoons, and obviously serve alcohol in the evenings. But again, this was in direct response to a changing market. And so when this goes online, it's really going to change the product offering for convention centers at this scale. And again, this is just a rendering of it during the 10-day festival. So you can see that building a building just to the property line is not the way to go. We want to give these buildings a chance to breathe, a chance to interact with the community, and a chance to kind of have flexibility on how you would want to program a place like this. So lastly, I just want to focus on Climate Pledge because I will say that this has been one of the best projects that Populous has ever done. This is a historic arena that's on the National Registry, just like Century 2. Client, which is Amazon, of course, came to us knowing that they had to keep the historic roof in place. Tough nut to crack, obviously. So I like this precedent because when you look at vintage photos of Century 2, they're eerily similar. Eerily similar. So this is what we did. We kept the roof in place. It was an engineering effort to do that, but it's possible. And I'm not saying that we know the solution right now for Century 2, but I'm saying that there's precedent out there for this to happen. In this next phase, as we start to explore this stuff, we would be zoned in on understanding what's happening with the Century 2 and the existing structure and how we would do that. So you can see in 1962 versus 2021, we actually supported the roof, dug out a new basement, and inserted in the NHL arena underneath it. So this is a construction photo of that in process. And this is what it looks like today. So it is a major transformation. However, when you approach the building, outside of a few landscape improvements and great public transportation, of course, you would never know that this was inserted underneath that product. So when we're talking about something like the 30,000 square foot ballroom in a re-envisioned Century 2, absolutely yes. It would be amazing to be able to transition that historic facility into something new and re-energized for the community. And of course, just the approach to the facility. So that's enough about other destinations. Let's focus on this project right here. And this is when it gets really exciting. So again, reimagine, expand, connect, and redevelop. No particular order here, but they're very synergistic on how these work together. The new 30K ballroom, the repurposed Century 2, the events plaza, and then the library event space. The expanded Bob Brown to the east, Bob Brown to the west, the outdoor events plaza, and then an industry standard back of house and loading that not only addresses Bob Brown, but it also addresses Century 2 and the Hyatt as well. And the plan would be to screen that from the Riverfront Park, so it is truly a dedicated back of house. The up and over connection, the vehicular drop-off, landscape terrace, really breaking down the scale between those two buildings. This would be public space that would allow people to transverse over this connection between the existing Bob Brown entry and the Century 2. So in this perspective view to the left, there's actually a pre-function lobby that is underneath this terrace that connects the existing Century 2 to the new Bob Brown program space. This naturally leads to a beautiful connection to the river And then if we really wanted to extend further out, this deposits people right into the sweet spot of the west side of the riverbank. And then just potential development. We are not married to these. We are just identifying what's possible. I think that there is a natural place to the southeast on site that could facilitate some type of additional private development. I think the Hyatt additional tower has a great home, and then potentially the development parcel to the northeast. If I'm just talking as an urban planner, this is where you want development on your site. You want things to develop at the corners, attract people, and then send people into your district. So here's the vision today as it was left in our last design exercise. I think if you squint, it doesn't look that much different, but when you zoom in on this, it's a completely transformed destination. The iconic blue roof stays, gets modernized, gets renovated. Everything inside the building gets modernized and renovated, but the appearance of Century 2 and its iconic look stays in place. We'll talk a little bit about the library, but knowing that that library space is vacant today, it would be an easy get to turn that into something dynamic while still maintaining that upper level for leasable space. I know that there's been talk about some tenants up there, but we really do not want to preclude anything from happening there, but we do want to give something back to the community. The expanded Bob Brown, as I discussed, and then there's the Hyatt Tower 2 over there. It's just 100 additional rooms. And then you can see the plaza out in front. We have it in kind of a hybrid parking food truck outdoor exhibit mode to just show how the parking and the interaction with the corner of Waterman and Main Street takes shape. So knowing that sustainability is a key component of this, sustainability is ethical. It's not about just doing LEED gold, LEED silver. In every design that we do, we want to make sure that we're giving back to the community. A building of this scale, we would certainly recommend some sort of renewable energy, whether that's photovoltaics or some kind of water collection or anything like that. So certainly don't want to give the perception that this would just be a big dark facade on your roof as people would fly into your destination. From across the river, I think you start to see how dynamic this can be. Re-energizing that plaza on the corner of the waterfront in Douglas, giving that back to the community. I did more searches for photos of Riverfest than I care to admit. And so I think that why not make that a better experience for everything along the river? You see that kind of slice that's coming back from the Century 2 with the photovoltaics on it. That is the new loading dock, covered loading dock for the Century 2 and all of its program on the inside. And then, of course, the up and over connection as it comes across the river, tying back into that existing amphitheater that already exists today, and then continuing that river walk all the way down to south of the Hyatt. This back facade of the of Bob Brown, screened loading, giving us a highly functional facility, but putting all of our meeting space on the upper level, and as you'll see, really creates some dynamic views across the river and into some other parts of town. So again, just kind of referencing where we're at for context. And the photovoltaics as well. So right now, this is a sea of similar colored precast concrete with some ramps and stairs, and what we would want to do is turn this into a true front door for Century 2. And so you can see a new potential entrance that not only goes right into the repurposed and reimagined Century 2, but right into that pre-function space that would then connect the two facilities. You can see the pedestrian connection of the up and over landscape connection that would take you across the river into the riverfront. And then our goal for the library, right now it has glass on all four sides. I think that's great. I think what we want to do is make that even better. I think we would want to put some operable partitions, overhead doors to turn that into a Four Seasons type of space. So in the summertime, it can bleed out with farmers markets, community events. In the wintertime, you can close those down. It could double as traveling art exhibits, the immersive Van Gogh, all of these types of things that we're starting to see come through our communities. And I think there's no better place for a home than something that's right at the front door of this district. So this right here hopefully this gives you a pretty good idea of where spaces of conventions are heading. This looks nothing like what's there today. And it's hospitality first, and it's experience first. There should be no separation from your hotel, from your new airport, to your convention center product. We like to call it experience DNA. They all need to tie in with each other. And so this would be that view looking from the expanded Bob Brown through that connector into the meeting, to the ballroom inside of Century 2. This view right here is the meeting space on top of the new exhibit halls, looking out to the east, right down English Street. It's a little hazy in this rendering, but you can see that we're right on axis with the arena and that development. So talk about an opportunity there to really reach and influence things that are outside of this immediate site and really enjoy that connection to the arena. So just to put some more context and color on this, I'm going to highlight these again, and these are just some imagery to show you what the expectation is. When we talk about the library, we're talking about something like Jane's Carousel in New York, something that's glowing, something that has translucency, something that adds excitement. When we're talking about a repurposed Century 2, that's a photo from the Arlington Convention Center. We repurposed their pre-function in a defunct ballroom into a purpose-built esports arena. It was the first one that was built in the United States. This is our ballroom in Sydney. Again, the product is different. The expectation for design is higher. And like I said, for the library, when you look at the library today, I love this kind of old photo of just the stacks in there. And when you look at the stacks, that's not too far-fetched from some kind of traveling art exhibit that could take shape in those types of spaces. And when you think about live music, unique experiences, immersive art, the Meow Wolves of the world, they're all looking for types of homes. And I think we have a real opportunity here adjacent to this facility. So just like what Bill said, these are all spaces from Oklahoma City. That's the entry lobby. Those are the meeting rooms. That's the new civic identity. We're talking about the same type of transformation here in Wichita, with probably more impact. And then this up and over connection. You know, one of our projects in Boston is right adjacent to, it's called the Lawn on D. It's the busiest public space in Massachusetts, and it's adjacent and operated to the convention center. So there's precedent out there to take control over your public space, and you can still use it for event days, but you can also program it accordingly for community events. And this middle photo, it's a little pixelated, but that's actually Riverfest, looking back onto the bank of the river. And then lastly, just having a development-ready site. Knowing that something is in place, I think, is going to attract a lot of attention from the private community, and just knowing that we've put the infrastructure there to support that. So I know parking isn't the most exciting thing in the world. Populous, we joke that every project we do is actually just a parking project with something surrounding it. So on site, you have about 850 spaces with the garage. This expansion would eat about 250 of those. However, there's ample opportunity to re-inject parking back into the site. To the left here, this is actually our Anaheim Convention Center expansion. We had to put 1,500 cars on the site of the expansion. And what we actually did was, in the truss depths of the X Hall, we put 2 levels of parking there. So that section to the top in those photos, the photo to the left is actually the parking inside the building. The photo to the right, that palm tree wall that we have there, that's actually the parking garage behind it, and you would never be able to know. So instead of seas of surface level parking, we would really recommend an integrated approach similar to the garage that you have today to free up more open land for events, development, and engagement. So that takes me to the end of the design piece. Part of our discussion with Mr. Manager was, what does this cost? And I know that this is always a big question. At this stage, this is a rough order of magnitude. There's high contingency here. The market can swing in either direction. But we're pretty confident that a $400 million number for everything that we've seen today is plenty to get this done. There's still a lot of engineering that would need to go into something like this. However, based off of precedents around the marketplace now, I think if you broke the building down into Century 2 program, Bob Brown, the repurpose of the library, and then you had a general fund for the redevelopment of the district, a $400 million price tag is certainly doable. Also, I just want to highlight that there are escalation, right? I would say up until the pandemic, we were pretty religious about a 2 to 3% escalation each year. Coming out of the pandemic, most of our consultants are requiring us to keep a 4 to 7%, but we're seeing that number coming down, of course. So it's certainly something that we keep our eye on as well when we're doing these kind of exercises. So I'll leave here with our, final image. This has just been an absolute pleasure to be back in Wichita and work on this stuff. It's just such an exciting opportunity, and this is the most fun part of these types of projects, and it's an excellent, one of the most excellent parts of my job personally. And so with that, Mr. Manager, thank you so much. I'll give it back to you.
Adam, thank you so much, and Bill. So you asked us to look at this, and we did. This is the start of a budget and CIP discussion, right? So open it up to you for your comments, your needs for information, how you want us to proceed going forward, additional information you'll need as we start to craft the CIP, talk about the short-term and long-term future of a facility like this or facilities like this. So looking for your feedback. And
let's open up for discussion then. Councilmember Blubaugh.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess first, Susie, I'd like to ask you, from all the past presentations we've had, what's changed in the world? Because, in past presentations we looked at, we kind of had a ceiling as to how we could grow conventions, and we were only going to get so far just because of Wichita's a destination. We don't have Disney World. We don't have an ocean. We don't have all the other things. So I guess that's the first question I have is what has changed to where we can draw more people in?
Welcome.
Good afternoon. It's interesting, Councilmember Blubaugh, is I've been in my role a decade. And I was here 6 months the first time I reached out to Bill. And we started having the feasibility, because I've been asked a million times about the convention needs, et cetera. And I said, we may have the perfect setup if it meets the demand. And we learned a decade ago that our facilities did not meet the demand of conventions. And so fast forward the last decade as we've looked at everything, so many different pieces of research. And then even after the pandemic, obviously the pandemic, we paused the Riverfront Legacy Master Plan, rightfully so, and re-engaged again and said, okay, what's happened after the pandemic? And we were thrilled to see that the demand for Wichita even grew. So we know we have a demand to come here, and we've known it for a long time. The challenge has been we just haven't had the product that meets the needs, and so we continually lose out on the business because of the facilities. And when you look at the facilities, because they're not subdividable, you can only have one event in Bob Brown at a time, and when you look at what's considered industry standard, even in Oklahoma City, it's subdividable, 4 times, so you have multiple events. So I don't necessarily, when you say what's changed, we've known a long time we need the demand. It's just been, this conversation has, I think, been a decade in the making. And looking forward and the ability to take all of the feedback that we've heard from the numerous community engagement efforts to come up with a plan that really, we repurpose Century 2, we repurpose the library, we expand Bob Brown, we get the facilities that we need to drive an incremental $45 million annually in economic output, all those visitors here, re-engage the river, connect the exciting things that are happening on the West Bank to the East Bank, and have opportunity for development. I got to tell you, I look at this and I'm thrilled with the opportunity and what it means for Wichita, what it means to attract talent, to retain talent, to have a strong core. It just seems that this absolutely will be transformational. So back to your original question, what's changed is we even know there's more demand than we knew a decade ago. There's huge opportunity. Every year we wait, we're missing out on about $45 million annually in economic output that we won't get back. So I'm thrilled with what we're looking at today.
I guess I appreciate that.
Sure.
I guess I'm trying to look at the new piece, the $30 million ballroom. Have we done a feasibility study, or have we got some input that says?
Sure. We've known since the beginning, back a decade ago, we needed a ballroom. That piece has been in for the past decade. We've known that when you look to industry standards are that your convention center has the ballroom, has the meeting space, has a contiguous space, as well as your headquarter hotel. So they have their each, and there's a demand for that. So we just don't have it in our current makeup under the current programming. So I think as we've reimagined, re-envisioned, when you think about putting the ballroom into the round dome, the Century 2, if you will, that's a whole new thought and a whole new idea. And when we were having those discussions, Adam, is it possible, is it doable? And then you connect it with the overpass over the top so that you could have a meeting and a convention going on the ground level, and residents are walking back and forth up and about, or there's an events going on outside. So we've known the ballroom needed to be there for a long time. The thought of utilizing that piece of Century 2 it kind of came up again from all of the discussions and then bringing Populous back to the table.
A $30 million ballroom?
Excuse me, at 30,000 square feet.
Yeah,
That space, again, and Bill will talk through that, but the program that he's recommending is right size. This is right size for Wichita. This isn't like build it and they will come. This is what we need. This is what the demand tells us we need. And again, even that contiguous space of 130,000, when you think about what's there now, that's not, vastly different, right? But the makeup and how it's laid out is absolutely vastly different and needed and transformational.
I know we've had a lot of inflation during the time I've been on council, but I'm looking at 30 million is about what we paid for the new library. It's
You're talking about the cost or the square footage?
The cost.
Oh.
$30 million estimate.
I will not lean into.
More.
I will.
I'll let Adam talk.
Yeah,
There's
I will.
more than just a ballroom. It's
Okay.
all of the support space, the kitchen space that serves both this ballroom as well as all of the new new Bob Brown.
Okay, I'm just trying to justify in my head, that's
Yeah,
more than what we paid for the library, half what we paid for the ballpark, so.
Okay, I'll turn-
Just trying to get a good idea, a little bit of an estimate on the math.
Yeah,
right?
no, totally. Let me just clarify that. And then, interesting for the ballroom to be broken out as its own line item. It's not something we would, typically do in a project like this, but because of the uniqueness of inserting it into an existing structure. Again, knowing that Century 2 just in general probably needs some work from a life safety code requirement, lots of things. Doing anything to Century 2 would trigger that, would trigger those kind of improvements. So all of that cost is wrapped into this program as well. Also, traditionally in your ballroom program, that is your highest cost per square foot of a convention center. And it's also your hardest working space with the highest level of finishes. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your ballroom makes the most money. So that is why typically if we broke out any of our projects, if we just broke it out by program space, the ballroom would naturally have a higher cost to it just because of all that's required to bring it up to industry standard. Great.
Further discussion, Councilmember Tuttle.
Thank you, and I'm not sure exactly who this question is for, and thank you for the presentation. I think this is fascinating as we're being forward-thinking in our community. I ask a lot of questions, and sometimes when you ask questions, it implies that you have a judgment, and I don't. I'm just asking very logistical questions to gain information. So on slide 16, you talk about significant and growing unmet market demands, and in 2021, when you interviewed 130 convention planners representing 150 events. And it said 5% would definitely use a new facility if we updated it, right? And 5% would be likely. So that's 10% of we're pretty sure, and then 37% possibly. And so I'm just wondering, again, it's not that I'm not supportive, and I do think something has to happen, but how do we swing that possibly that 37% up so that we have better margins? Yeah, the slides aren't all numbered, but I counted, and it's slide 16. And even if you can't find it, that's okay. But do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah.
10% of, this is a huge price tag and a huge project. For 10% we think would come, how do we get more from the possibly into the definitely or likely? What about this plan do you think could or would do that? Do we know? Thank you. Yeah, that's a slide. Thank you. And I have a lot of questions, but then I'll let my colleagues go.
Of course. So it's hard to explain exactly what this means, but for every survey that we do across the country for projects like this, we consider possibly to be, when we're thinking about how that would convert into actual utilization of a product, the possibly versus definitely, obviously we need to weight the definitely a lot more than the possibly. The possibly, though, suggests that we at least have the ability to compete for that business, assuming that the rest of their expectations are met. So when you're talking about people that say possibly, that means that they're intrigued by the destination, but they need to know more. They need to know that the headquarter hotel and the ancillary hotels are going to be supportive. They need to know what the rates would be for the product. They need to check into airfare and airlift and how that's going to work, for their particular event. So in our experience over 30 years, it's been, when we have these conversations, we still consider possibly to be a positive response, feedback from these event planners that it's more of, at that point, a marketing messaging exercise in order to convert them from a possibly to a likely once there's more clarity with regard to what the product is and where the location is and all the other pieces that they're looking for. So, when we look at these kind of projects that we've done surveys like this, and then ultimately they've been designed and built, we go back and say, were we off by our demand projections? Were we off by our understanding of what the market was really looking for? And we've aligned pretty closely, and in a lot of cases conservatively, because you've got this momentum that happens when project starts getting advertised and word gets gets around through the industry. You've got Susie and her team putting the word out that we are coming to market with a state of the industry product that's been lacking. Why don't you take another look at Wichita, or why don't you take a look at it for the first time in terms of what it's got to offer? So it's hard to explain exactly how that translates into ultimate utilization, but this is a process that's really instrumental in getting that feedback. The groups that say definitely not and not likely are those that we have a real uphill battle to try to convert them. But the ones that are possibly are basically the way that we look at that is they need to know more about the project before they can give a more direct answer in terms of definitely or likely will be there for an event 3 years from now or something like that. That makes sense.
If I may,
Councilmember Frye.
Councilmember Tuttle, thank you. If I may, Councilmember Tuttle, you also see a shift on the definitely not from 32 to 20%. So that's a positive impact from the people that used to say no. Now we've had a definite positive feedback the other way.
Yeah, and incidentally, in going back and looking at the 2013 survey compared to the more recent survey, it's clear that more of the market is familiar with the Wichita destination than they were 10 years ago. When we had conversations, there was a significant percentage of people that said, I know what Wichita is, but I've never been there, I don't know anything about it. So they may show up in the possibly, but more often they'll show up in the not likely or definitely not, because they just have this preconception about whether that destination is going to be attractive and suitable for their convention group and their attendees. But what we're seeing is there is more visitation that has occurred within Wichita, more word of mouth about the great stuff that's been happening at the riverfront and in the downtown. There's more people within the event industry that have used Intrust Arena and have had a successful operation there, more that have stayed at the Hyatt and realized that that's a great headquarter hotel. So there's more of that momentum that you're getting into. I would suspect if we did the same survey 10 years from now, we'd see even more, all else equal, demand growth just by virtue of your presence as a destination within the greater tourism industry.
You'll see that in 5 years.
5 years, yep.
Wichita's a global city, just not everyone in your survey knows it yet. So I bet this has improved in the last even couple of years, yep. But good analysis. Further comments or questions? I think follow up with Councilmember Tuttle? Oh. I think first of all, and then I'll just make a couple comments. I just want to thank folks who've been involved in this project. It feels like we've really listened to not only feedback from individuals throughout the last few years who are interested in seeing something happen, but also, I guess, really want to see the right thing happen when it comes to activating that part of the river. Also, with the pandemic, it feels like we're in the right spot now to learn lessons from the pandemic, grow from that, and also just get a glimpse before any ground was broken when it comes to what the future of conventions are going to be, what the technology is, and exactly what people are looking for. So although it's been a wild few years, I feel like the conversation now today is just a better reflection of our economic realities, and also I think the expectations from folks in the community. So I really want to thank the people who've worked on this so hard to combine years of data and also public perception, and of course the expertise to how do we take all that and create a vision for it. And I just want to, I guess, and it's premature, of course, but the price tag is quite a bit, so I'd love to talk about funding mechanisms. I know that this is going to be a discussion as we move forward. We're not going to vote on this next week. We're not going to sign a check for $400 million, and that's not, this process is not anything that is going to happen fast. So love to talk about funding mechanisms. I know it's going to be something that people are going to be very interested in, and also just continue to, I guess, when you have a vision here, be agile with input from the public, from the industry, from our local business community on what we could do to create a product that for in a space that the majority or overwhelming majority of folks are interested in. So I just want to thank you for that, and also again look forward to some of the more technical stuff because we're going to need a little more CIP, I think, for this one. This is and just to put that in perspective, the arena was $205 million. So this is twice the cost of the Interest Bank Arena, roughly, give or take 10 million. It's a weird job when you can say give or take 10 million, right? But it's in that ballpark. And the ballpark was 75 million. So it's quite an investment. So we will need community buy-in and folks really excited about this to be able to justify moving forward. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Councilmember Tuttle, for follow-ups.
Thank you. I'm a huge advocate for the performing arts and the visual arts. Proud member of the Arts Council Board. So one of the questions that I have is on page 54. It's the ballroom in the round building, but then it also says repurposed Century 2. And if everybody else caught it, I don't know exactly what that means. And then my follow-up question, I guess, to that is, what about performing arts? And I'm assuming it probably means a new performing arts facility, but that's something that I just want to make sure that we're really cognizant of displacement of some of our quality of life initiatives that are regionally significant. Thank you.
Yeah. In my introduction, I indicated that we're not ready yet for that performing arts discussion. We know from previous studies, and Adam talked about how this all builds, from work we did previously. We know we cannot accommodate the modern needs for performing arts in Century 2. The current facility is adequate, but it's barely adequate, right, for the needs of our users. And we also found that if we were trying to relocate that inside the building, we have severe limitations to the point where you'd probably have to break through the roof in order to be able to get the fly space and everything else that was necessary. So what we'll bring forward to you in the future is a discussion about how we handle performing arts in a new facility going forward, right? That will meet the needs of not just today, but be dynamic enough that it can continue to change as the needs for performing arts changes. But I'll let Adam talk about the repurposed portion.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for the performing arts commentary. The repurpose is a great. I know it's a placeholder for now, but it would be foolish for us to tell you what's going in there at this very moment. That's a community thing, and when we, ideally when we move forward in this process, that is something that would be at the forefront of understanding what infrastructure, if there's anything lacking, anything that's desirable. I know that, esports is a great one, and we're putting esports everywhere. It's not the silver bullet, but it's certainly something to think about. It's not going away. It is I don't play video games, but there are professional teams, and so there's great precedent out there, and it's not a silver bullet. So it will take real analysis to understand what makes sense, that is a study in itself. And I just want to say that in the cost, what we've included is to basically bring everything in Century 2 up to modern code. So I'm talking electrical, mechanical, all of that stuff. So ideally, that whatever we would do there could slide right into a more modern space, right? The bones would be brought up to modern standards. So,
If I can add to that,
Yeah.
one of the things we've learned from other cities that have redone their convention space or moved into new convention space is that there's still some concerns by the smaller groups, especially nonprofits that have used the convention center space in the past. And the concern is that they would be priced out of the market by moving into the new space. And so one of the things we've talked about is by simply upgrading the other half of Bob Brown, right, that repurposed, that we could create that space for those, especially the smaller events, that would be maintained as affordable. And I think that would be well received by those groups that are currently using a portion of this building today.
Absolutely, we definitely would need a plan for the Performing Arts Center before we move forward, or else I'm pretty sure we would not be very successful. Councilmember Blubaugh.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I kind of want to expand on that a little bit since a couple of my colleagues have said it. What would a timeline look like? Like, how long would we be dark from shows if we don't have a plan right now, and we were looking to go forward with something else?
I believe the council has supported this in the past. We've told the existing users of performing arts that they would not have a dark period, right? So what we would do is come up with a plan that where performing arts facility would be built before we'd be able to go forward with these improvements, right? Before we would relocate. Now, we could do this in phases, and you could do portions of the improvements. For instance, our capital improvement program probably could accommodate the library improvements if you were looking at some kind of incremental. If you wanted to turn that over for community use sooner than the whole project, you probably could find that 15 million at some point in the CIP. That gives us time to be planning for the other pieces of this, right? But then Adam can talk about how you could how you'll phase construction so that you never go totally dark. You may have to make adjustments on how you accommodate some conventions during that interim period.
Yeah, I would say that's very common for all of our projects. San Antonio is a great example. We never lost a single day of business during all of construction. It was an active expansion, and that's kind of, we were all having moments of clarity when we were discussing this plan, way back in December. That's the beauty of taking that ballroom and putting it into Century 2, is that you could essentially keep Century 2 operational as it is today. Do what you need to do at Bob Brown. Once Bob Brown goes online, then you can go move to Century 2 and take care of what's inside of Century 2. So having two facilities adjacent with each other, it's actually going to give us a lot of flexibility on how we could sequence these types of things. Yeah.
But we could potentially be looking at double this if we're looking to performing arts and this project. Would that be accurate, or are we assuming, because I assume the performing arts, if the ballroom is going to be one of the highest cost doing this, I assume a performing arts is going to be per square foot probably comparable, isn't it?
I will be honest with you. I cannot give you an honest answer. I do not really integrate into the performing arts cost estimate at this point, so I wouldn't want to say anything.
Okay. Hey, does anybody know much about the Overland Park Convention Center size, cost, when it was built, anything like that? Kind of like to throw that out there. Just
yeah, I do. I mean, just relationship to Kansas City, of course. Okay. Early 2000s, definitely a more suburban product, and I would say, I think Bill would back me up on here, that from a cost to build standpoint, a little bit skewed just because of geography. Ample space out there, lots of place to lay down. So I would say in that building, from a finish level, is antiquated already. So they built that for pennies on the dollar of what you would see today in a modern convention center. So everything that we would recommend for this is something of a new generation. And so I would say, size-wise, this puts us right into that same category as Overland Park.
What makes that antiquated? I'm just curious.
Well, the fact that it's in Overland Park is pretty antiquated in itself, where, if you're talking about, just bringing business, there's a real need for people to want to be part of the center of the action, So when I'm a meeting planner, and we've heard this universally globally, when you put something that's more of a suburban destination versus something that's integrated within the community, infrastructure the same, they always go with the city, always. And I would say that you look at these facilities like Overland Park, and I'm not saying anything bad against them. I mean, they were serving a need. But we're certainly seeing a pivot, to the other direction of these right-sized facilities that are closer to their communities, not necessarily kind of out on an island.
Okay. Just one more question. I can tell you've put a lot of work into this, the whole group has. I'm just curious, was this funded from our investment a few years back? Is that what's?
It was jointly funded by the city and by Visit Wichita. The total cost was $40,000, 20 from the city and 20 from Visit Wichita.
Okay, what was the investment a few years ago? Wasn't it a couple $100,000 by the city and the county? Do you remember? I thought it was like an $800,000 investment.
I can't it was in that ballpark. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact dollar amount. Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was curious about, if this was a continuation of this, but it sounds like we got quite a bit here for the investments. Thank you.
It was 500,000 private sector, 100,000 county, 100,000 city.
Thank you, sir.
We're gonna need this to be better than anything Overland Park has.
Oh, I can,
That's,
as
should
somebody
go without
that's
saying.
not from Kansas City, I promise you that will happen.
Excellent. Further discussion.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm glad there are no swimming pools in the river. Other than that, I was waiting to see what this would look like. So definitely kudos to the team on this. I can see a lot of the feedback we got on the riverfront plan with the green space, activating the river, opportunities there. I think that's good. It's also creative on Bob Brown going east and west. I like all of that. Curious about the other half of Century 2, because a lot of what we also heard was that that's 400,000 square feet. We don't necessarily need all of that. And this kind of shows we're only going to be using half of it, at least at this point. But I do like the way that it's activated, building the parking within, much like the other plan. Folks always talk to us about parking. There are, I think, a lot of benefits to the plan. I've always been concerned about us settling as a city, and I think that a lot of this is not that. There are some things that can attract folks. I'd be interested to hear more public feedback on, now that this is out, what folks think. But I think this is a great start for discussion. I do see all of the other plans incorporated into this, so I appreciate that attention to detail as well. And the commitment of green space over the pedestrian walkway, I think, is really unique, pretty cool. And ultimately, at the end of the day, my hope is that we have something unique to Wichita. So when you have folks say they want to go to the gathering place, they want to go to KC Power and Light, Wichita's in that discussion, and they want to come to whatever this whole thing is called as well. And I think we can get most of that traffic if we do it right. So I think we're taking steps in the right direction.
Absolutely. Vice Mayor Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to say I appreciate all the work you've done. It really looks like you've been listening to the community and trying to incorporate what the majority of Wichitans want. They want to save Century 2. They also want new things that are reflective of where our city is going. So I appreciate all the work that you've done so far. Also, I'd be curious to see how you guys plan on utilizing reusable energy and renewable energy. We are trying to keep our carbon footprint here as close to zero as possible, so I'd be interested to see where you guys are going with that. And also, where are the laboratories where we're keeping the aliens from the spaceship? That's one of my questions here. Is that something we need to invest in as well? But maybe this isn't the place to kid about it, but that's all right.
We know the majority of us likely got a text message from someone asking that question, so thank you for bringing it up. Councilmember Fry.
Thank you. And I want to echo refer to a couple of comments my colleagues made. The swimming pool in the river, that was a wild idea back in 2019 when this first Riverfront Legacy Master Plan was proposed. And whether or not that was a serious idea or not, it was a conversation starter, right? And it got people thinking about what if, and what could our civic center look like? You had the phrase earlier, putting the civic back in the civic center. I think that got us talking and having conversations about what this footprint could look like. You look back over the years and it's changed, but it's always been kind of a jumbled mess, and it really didn't have a lot of cohesion and connectivity. But that got us talking, right? And then we had the pandemic, and it delayed that conversation, right? And I want to thank the community for feeding back to us, not only to the designers that worked on that, but also to the council, and shared with us their vision of what downtown should look like. And someone said earlier, we don't want to settle. I think this vision, whether or not all of this comes to fruition, is a vision that doesn't settle. And it gets us to a place where we need to be from a standpoint of not only what our public wants, but also what the future of Wichita looks like. And seeing that economic return is amazing. And hopefully getting started, whether it's in phases or all at once. We know that there's a business case to be made for making this investment, not only for the economic output, but also for the psyche of our community, and that we are a world-class leading city. And projects like this, or Interest Bank Arena, or Eisenhower Airport, that demonstrates to the rest of the world that Wichita is a leading city. So again, I want to thank the community for feeding back to us their dreams and aspirations for what we can put here. Again, this is just the beginning. Hopefully this conversation continues and we work through some of these other issues, as well as the funding. But it starts with that conversation, whether it's a swimming pool in the river or not, it gets us going. So thank you.
Further discussion. Councilmember Tuttle.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember Fry, you set me up. I was going to ask that. This is exciting for us. This is the first time I've seen this. Other may have been privy to see it, but I haven't. And there's so many parts of it that I really love and am excited about. If you think about our city right now and all the momentum that we have, all the growth and development we're seeing, 5 major infrastructure projects with water treatment, BNR, North Junction, East Kellogg, K96, it just seems like this is the next thing, right? And so there's so much momentum going. But I'm curious, we've been privy to this, folks have been in the room, some people will see it online, they'll see the news. What is the next step? How do we take this into concepts and dreams to possibly fruition? Thank you.
Mayor, Councilmember, because of its size, right? I know you all need some time to process this. The community needs time to take a look at it. You need continued feedback. I envision that as we go forward, I think we have at least 3 more budget work sessions. During one of those, especially when we focus on CIP, we'll probably talk more about your thoughts. Is this a project that you want us to try to find a phased approach to? Is this one that you want to try to find a single funding source that in a limited period of time funds the entire project? Those are the kinds of things that I believe we need to talk about. And then also, is this the general direction that you want to go? I mean, I know you need time to think through that.
Further discussion. Again, I just want to thank everyone who's worked on this. I want to thank the public for being here and also engaging in this process. I do want to just emphasize this is a conversation starter. This is the first step of talking about ways that we can revitalize this section of downtown. Really, we are looking for feedback. We're looking for input. This plan might change as folks give us that feedback or as industry communicates with staff as well. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that this is the beginning of that, or the beginning of the continuation of an older discussion, but through, frankly, a new chapter. And as we move forward, please let us know what you think, because this is the time to really not only think big, but also have those conversations so that we can make sure that whatever happens as we move forward, it represents the will of the people of Wichita, and it's going to be a lasting investment that can be enjoyed not just in the short term, but also for generations to come. So again, thank you all for being a part of this, and as we move forward, we look forward to continuing this discussion and seeing, did we hit the mark, or do we need to adjust a little bit? If there is no further discussion,
I was gonna say something.
Were you gonna say something?
Well, I guess I'll say it, because I said it on the
Councilmember
riverfront.
Johnson.
I just really hope this is not another plan that gets put on the shelf. I know that our other plans were used to develop this, but one of the things I've wanted to make sure is we actually do something. And we've been talking about this too long now, so I'm hoping we get a lot of robust public discussion, but we actually act. Because if we don't, we'll continue to see talent go elsewhere. We'll continue to miss out on opportunities. So every year that goes by, we're missing out on $45 million. So hopefully that pushes us to do something.
Okay, are we good now? Further discussion? See none, if there is no objection, then we're adjourned. No objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all.